When you watch movies about the Middle Ages, you most likely are familiar with these knights that lived in medieval Europe. And they're somewhat of a symbol of those times. But you have to know that these knights are much older than you think. Thousands of years older than these medieval European warriors. We have to go back to the Middle East. These ancient cataphracts first came along in the Bronze Age, specifically in Mesopotamia. These types of warriors from ancient times is called a cataphract, which is an ancient Greek word, and it really means a suit of armor that covers the whole body. The first empire that used cataphracts was the Assyrian Empire, but it wasn't as complicated as you think. It was kind of like a metal vest that they would have around their body that would protect them in battle. But the more we move forward, the more advanced these suit of armors get. In this era, in part of eastern Iran, there was a certain warriors that not only had their entire body covered in armor, but their horse was completely covered as well. And these are the true cataphracts. It has been written that Cyrus the Great, with the help of these cataphracts, expanded the greatest Persian empire the world had ever seen, the Achaemenid Empire, which was the world's first superpower. After the Achaemenid Empire, the Parthians continued that tradition of cataphracts. In this era, the Parthian cataphracts was known as the scariest warriors of all time. And if you've seen the Battle of Carrhae, Surena used this against the first war the Persians and the Romans had. And with the help of these cataphracts and their style of battle, they embarrassed the Romans. Some historians refer to the Parthian and the Sasanian era as the cataphract era because most of the Persian and Roman wars used these warriors in them. The Romans had their own types of cataphracts, but they were never the same caliber as the Persian ones. And the Romans did have a different style of fighting. In the Sasanian era, the cataphracts get even more advanced and the warriors get even more experience. And this is truly when they're referred to as one of the greatest warriors in that era. Another thing is that the Parthian style of warfare versus the Sasanian is completely different. The Parthian warfare style is very famous because they don't really fight head to head. They attack and retreat. So basically, they do the maximum amount of damage without taking damage. And if you pay attention to the Battle of Carrhae, this is exactly what happens. They kill more than 20,000 Roman soldiers while only losing less than 1,000 men. And this shows how they fought. But the Sasanian had the different style of warfare. They would go headfirst into the battlefield. So that's why these cataphracts had to be more advanced. You might ask, why didn't the Sasanian use the Parthian style warfare? It's because the Parthians didn't want to conquer new areas, but the Sasanians did. So their style of battle was to go head first, do a whole lot of damage, and keep pushing the enemy backwards. And their goal was to conquer territory, but the Parthian goal was to protect their own territory. Historians have written that the Parthian army had a low amount of cataphracts, but when you fast forward to the Sasanian army, most of the warriors are cataphracts. If you search on the internet, the Sasanian cataphract or the Sassanid cataphract, you get an image like this, where the entire soldier and the horse is covered in armor. And usually these types of cataphracts is the symbol of the Sasanian army. But you have to know that the cataphract style of the Sasanian army was up to how much wealth the warrior had. A professional highly advanced warrior had the best gear as well. they usually built it themselves or had it built by someone professional. The reason was that is to be a warrior for your country was truly inspiring, and it took a whole lot of pride. Of course, you would have a paycheck as well. It's not like you were fighting for free. A lot of Europeans called these types of cataphracts ancient tanks, and for that era it makes sense because they truly were invincible in some sense. You couldn't damage them with swords, and also arrows had a hard time penetrating them. Another scary feature is that you couldn't see the warrior's face, which made the battlefield even more scary. In that era, advanced empires like the Persians and the Romans, they would train kids from a very early age to become warriors. It's kind of like going to school, and finally when you graduate from college, you're a highly advanced warrior and you're pretty much ready for battle. It is interesting to know in this era, when Chinese travelers visited the Sasanian Empire, they have written that you see small kids training and riding sheep, and when they get a little older, they give them arrows so they can start hunting different types of animals. And slowly when they get older, they start riding horses and practicing the same methods. So when you reach the age of 16, 17, you're a highly advanced warrior. Most of the Sasanian kids in some areas, they would practice riding, shooting arrows, and wrestling. Who were the coaches of these kids? Was it their parents? No, in this era, there were very experienced coaches that were chosen throughout the satraps called the Andarsbat. It was important for a coach like this to teach kids at an early age, to give them the proper techniques so they can learn everything perfectly. One of the historians in that area is Herodian from Rome. This is not Herodotus from a very long time ago. Herodian has written about many things about the Romans and the Sasanians. He has even written about the first battle they had. The king of the Sasanian Empire at that time was Ardashir I. In this time, Ardashir allowed the Roman army to get very close to the Persian capital, Ctesiphon. The Romans thought everything was fine and they're gonna conquer the capital. But that's where they're wrong, because this was a trap. When the Sasanian army got them where they wanted, they pretty much surrounded them and started attacking from all directions. Herodian has written that the Persian army pretty much caught the Roman army like fish in a net. And you could say somewhat the Battle of Carrhae repeated here. In this battle, the Romans were heavily defeated, and the main warriors the Sasanians used was the cataphracts. The Sasanians were so victorious that Herodian, even though he's Roman, has written about it and hasn't said many negative things about Ardashir I's method. After this, the Romans and the Persians fought one another, and most of the time was to claim Armenia, because they both thought they were the rightful owner of Armenia. If you've seen our video about the longest war in history, you'll know the 700-year war between the Persians and the Romans. Of course, as you know, none of them were able to defeat one another and conquer one another, but they fought for so long that they exhausted one another, and that caused the Muslims to not only defeat the Persians, but push the Romans way back. Even though these ancient empires were extinct, but these cataphracts stayed well and alive, and they got more and more advanced. The Muslim army used it, and of course the Europeans started to use it. And when you go centuries forward, you get to these military tanks of the 20th century. But you have to know that those old knights of medieval Europe were mainly part of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was extremely unstable empire, and there was always war inside it. So these knights were extremely important if you wanted to stay alive. If you've seen our video about Switzerland or the Holy Roman Empire, you're very familiar with this era of Europe.